joining us for another episode of the Tell Not Show. As always, we are your hosts. We have the wonderful Kirsha Fox, author of newly released Son of Deception, homeschooling mom of four, and avid gamer.
All right. And we have Julia J.K. Allen. She's an editor, author, and author coach. She is a fantasy and horror author who loves to put magic in everything. Thanks so much for being with us today.
Yes, and we're very excited. We have the future of writing on tonight. Dylan Brennan.
Yes, tonight we have Dylan Brennan. He is a 16-year-old writing prodigy living in London. An avid reader, student, and musician, Dylan has recently proven his academic excellence with his outstanding GCSE grades, obtaining a phenomenal 11 grade 9s. For those of you in the States, that's like absolute top grades, straight A's. An aspiring author, Noble Betrayed is Dylan's first work, and will hopefully launch a promising writing career, experimenting with and forming innovations in a wide variety of literary genres.
Yes. So happy to welcome you. Hello and welcome.
Hi.
So good to have you on, and congratulations on the wonderful mark.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So tell us a little bit about your writing journey. When did you start writing, and kind of what drove you to the writing path?
Yeah, so I've almost always been writing. I think probably around year 3 was when I started writing like seriously, and it's when it started getting recognized as a sort of talent of mine.
Mm-hmm.
And then in terms of Novel Betrayed specifically, that would have been during the pandemic when not a lot was going on, so I thought it was a really good idea to start a sort of big project that could end up being life-changing, and that led to Novel Betrayed being formed.
Wonderful. So you kind of always had this spark and passion for writing, and it's just like 2020 afforded a lot of us the opportunity to have the time to sit down and do stuff like write a novel. Congratulations, by the way. Writing a novel is such an accomplishment, so I always like to congratulate you.
Yeah, it feels like an accomplishment.
Oh, absolutely. Tell us a little bit about Noble Betrayed and what the novel's about.
So Noble Betrayed is an epic fantasy novel. So yeah, epic fantasy is in big cast, lots of characters, and that's a pretty big book. It's 460 pages.
Wow.
And it revolves around about 10 points of view, I think. And the main one is Simon Parjan, who is the callous lord of course, House Parjan. He's quite reserved compared to the other lords. He likes to spend a lot of his time alone with his family and his staff. However, he is old friends with the king, whose name is Eminar Woodged. And Eminar calls Simon up to be his High Earl. High Earl is the sort of second in command of the Great Kingdom. And even though Simon's initially reluctant, he ends up accepting. However, it's at a really bad time because his wife, Gwendis Wayne, sees it as the perfect opportunity to get revenge against him for domestically abusing her in the past. And at the same time, there's also a plot to assassinate the king, which the council believes is orchestrated by Gwendis's brother, Tyrell Wayne, who is also a point of view character. And then the other points of view are mostly consisted of his children. So, for example, there's Daron Parjan, who is deaf. He gets a pet baby griffin, so that's very fun to write. And he also his chapters were very fun to write because I can't rely on dialogue, so it's like description oriented because it's from his point of view. And his story is about uncovering a sort of mystery about the kingdom that just completely changes everything and makes it more than a generic fantasy story.
Yeah, that sounds absolutely fascinating. It kind of is giving me a little Game of Thrones vibe with the High Court and stuff. So that's super interesting.
I love when there's like lines of mystery tucked into the fantasy, a puzzle to figure out for sure.
Yeah, there's definitely a puzzle to figure out.
So what drew you to the fantasy genre?
Fantasy's always been a genre that I've been into, and during the pandemic I was reading A Song of Ice and Fire, so the books that Game of Thrones was based on. and I would have been reading The Witcher as well. So yeah, some of the biggest fantasy novels in the genre I was reading, and it's a genre that I've always been into ever since watching probably like the Lord of the Rings movies and things like that. So yeah, I knew that when I began my writing career, I did want to start with fantasy, or at least have it be one of the first genres that I wrote in. I don't plan on it being the only genre that I write, because I've already started writing a book that isn't fantasy. So yeah, but because it was one that I had a passion for, I knew that it was going to be one of the ones that I wanted to prioritize.
All right.
Yeah, fantasy is a very special genre for a lot of us. We kind of find our first loves in that. What does your writing process look like? Like going from idea to draft to final manuscript. How does that look for you?
It's hard to describe how I get my ideas, because they are sort of a matter of they just pop into my head and then I put them on paper. But then with drafting, it depends on the chapter. Sometimes I do write the entire thing in one go, and then I'll be constantly reworking it until I'm finally content with it. Other times I write it in pieces and finalize each piece before I go on to the next one. And then with the entire manuscript, I'll be reading. After each chapter, I read everything that I've already written again, as in a proofreading sense, to make sure there are no plot holes and things like that. And I'll just keep doing that until I'm 100% content with everything, because I am a perfectionist. So there will be like tiny wording changes that I will be really happy with one day, and then I'll despise them the next.
Right.
That sounds very thorough.
Sounds familiar too. I think I know I myself am guilty of a little perfectionism that trying to break as an adult. But yeah, I can definitely relate. I think when you're really passionate about something, it's hard not to want it to be perfect, right? When it's our creation and it's so special to us. Are you like someone that takes a lot of notes then, or do you just kind of like sit down and write and see what happens?
Yeah, so with Noble Betrayed, because it was sort of a fresh experience for me, I mostly relied on just using Notepad, where I was typing like the skeleton of the book and the appendix. The appendix, like listing all the characters, was one of the first things that I did. I think it was the first thing I did, actually. So I began with that, so like knowing who's who and who is related to who. Then I did the skeleton, and then I put notes on what I wanted to happen in each chapter. And then most of that ended up changing by the end. Some characters were originally planned to be alive and then ended up dying, and things, and vice versa. So yeah, it changed a lot. But now I'm doing it more methodically, because I've invested in some writers' notebooks and things like that. So it is more. It less of it is contained in my head and written down to make sure that I don't forget anything that I've come up with.
That's the bane of all writers, as we always say, like, oh, I'll remember that. That was a great idea. I won't forget that.
And then 5 seconds later,
it's
just gone. Right. Flies out of your head.
It is funny when we have a very clear plot and then our characters decide to do something else.
Yeah, usually completely the opposite, right?
Yes.
It's been a lie this whole time.
Right. Now, you speak in your bio about wanting to be really innovative with your writing and experiment with it. Tell us a little bit more about this and what drives you to want to innovate.
I think that recently all forms of media in the industry have become oversaturated with sort of generic stories, and those are the ones that tend to be doing better. So I think that I like thinking outside of the box. So I do want to try and be more innovative with my writing styles and make sure that everything that I deliver is something that is at least a little bit different to everything that's been seen before, to make me stand out.
That's a good answer.
It is, yeah.
That's one of the wonderful things that is particularly indie publishing allows us to do, is to try new different things, whereas traditional publishers tend to rely on what is known and proven to sell.
Right. We do love indie writers on here, being indie writers ourselves. But yeah, like Kirsha was saying, it's a great opportunity to not worry about what is and isn't allowed, right? Because you're putting it out yourself and letting the readers experience.
Yeah, there's no such thing as what is and isn't allowed, unless you're talking about like political correctness, I guess.
Right.
Because
Well,
there are some things that might seem wildly like this is definitely not for the public, and then it ends up being something that everyone enjoys, and then it ends up
Mhm.
shaping what we end up calling generic. So
Right.
there are things that are influential in that way.
Absolutely.
So being such a young writer, you are in good company with the author of, well, like Aragon is a very well loved series, The Inheritance Cycle, and then also The Outsiders, also written by teenagers. Um, so what struggles do you have, and like what triumphs have you already had so far? Just
I don't think my age has caused many struggles. That I think it's actually caused more triumphs than I would have had if I was maybe like 10 or 20 years older.
mm-hmm,
Because it does give me a unique angle with the fact that I'm 16 and have published a 460-page fantasy book.
Hmm.
Um, but I think it's I've been doing lots of podcasts like this one. I've been doing I've attended a literary festival
Oh,
and
nice.
things like that, speaking on behalf of young authors. So I do think that I've had a lot of triumphs. I wouldn't say there have been any significant setbacks yet.
Yeah, it's good to hear that there hasn't been any like obstacles put in front of you as a young author. I think we all want to be encouraging of new authors, but especially young authors. Um, so we love to hear that it's all victories so far. What is important, do you think, for younger authors to know when they're beginning, or even just newer authors to know as they're starting out?
I think the best thing that young authors should keep in mind when they're starting out is that they shouldn't limit themselves.
Mm.
I do think that even though we do promote expressing the voice of the youth a lot, I do think that there's still some internalized ageism built into the system,
Hmm.
and young authors do, or just young people in general, do sometimes feel like that, even though they have strong opinions and a voice that they can express, they might not be able to actually make as much change as they would like to.
Right.
Um, but yeah, I guess don't have any limits. Ensure that the voice that you carry throughout your novel is 100% your voice, because that genuine nature to your writing is what is going to make it good.
Absolutely, because it's not just about telling like a new story, it's about telling it in your the way you only you can, right?
mm-hmm,
That we always talk about there's no such thing as like an original story, everything's been told, but it's always new because only each individual person can only tell it their way, and that means that it's always new the way they tell it too.
mm-hmm.
Um,
Also,
so
there's not bowing to the criticism of others who, um, I think that's what you're trying to say is don't change yourself based on
mm,
what other people tell you should or
Yeah.
shouldn't be.
absolutely.
No,
Hmm.
your voice is in like this is your story and you're telling it. Yes.
Right. Right.
Even if it doesn't feel like there are people near you who are loving it, there will definitely be someone in the world who loves it, even if they're on the other side of the world.
Mm-hmm.
Absolutely. Yeah, no, I love that. And it's very empowering to think about that, we have the opportunity to tell our stories and to have our voice and to speak about issues like you were saying. Sometimes we feel like we can't make the big changes that we want to see in the world. But you can always write a book and change somebody's world by them reading it. What do you think are some pitfalls to avoid as a newer or young author?
Hmm. I don't think the pitfalls that young authors will face are that different to the pitfalls that adult authors will face.
Hmm.
I I guess a lot of hmm, I think the main pitfall with young authors is again sort of like I said, but the opposite, as in they set limits for themselves.
Mm-hmm.
And I think don't set limits for yourself, because that can inhibit your work from being as good as it can be.
Mm-hmm.
Right. Don't stifle the creativity with restrictions. I would
Yeah.
agree with that. Yeah. So when you're going through and making all of these notes and outlines, do you do this all analog or digital? Like, do you like writing by hand, or is everything on the computer?
Bit of both, because Noble Betrayed was more or less all done digitally, but now I'm trying out analog as well. And
Mm,
then if you count memory as a form of keeping notes as well, then there's that
right.
too. So yeah, I'm open to everything. I think analog is the best for. I would say that analog is the best for writing down notes the second they come into your head, but then digital is
Mm,
better for finalizing them, because you have like an infinite amount of storage on a computer.
Mm-hmm.
Well, not infinite, but it's a lot bigger than a book.
right. Right. And you don't have to find
Digital,
what page it's on.
yeah,
Yeah.
digital is definitely faster.
Hmm.
Absolutely.
You
Mhm.
can just press Control F and search for a page.
Yes.
Right, right. That was one thing that was always frustrating, as I always had notebooks for all my stories, but then I'd be like, "Oh, where in the notebook is? I know it's this notebook, but like now I gotta find through all the 100 pages like where I put this one specific mark
Mm-hmm.
to
No one
remember."
understands our struggles.
Right, only fellow authors. But that's why we love chatting with other authors, is to kind of share the struggles and triumphs. Um,
So, what is your favorite part of writing, of being a writer?
Yeah, I guess experimenting and innovating and trying things that I don't think have been done before, or at least writing expressions that haven't been done before. I'll probably have like an idea for what I want to say in a sentence in my head, and then I'll spend about 5 minutes thinking about the best way to word it in a way that's original and I don't think I've heard before.
Oh,
Mm-hmm.
that's really interesting that you're so intentional with your word choice and stuff. I think that's a very admirable quality in a writer. Um, what is your least favorite part of writing?
I guess writing like filler that you need to write in order for to get from A to B, because there are
Mm,
definitely some chapters that or even like short stories and things that I've written where I know that in a chapter I know the beginning is going to be really fun to write, and then the ending is really fun to write. But you can't go directly from A to B. You need to write stuff in between. So it's writing
right.
Mm-hmm.
that filler where it doesn't actually have as much of a purpose, but I know it needs to be there for it to make sense.
That pesky middle part. Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, the sagging the middle, as they like to call
Mhm.
it, that can definitely be a struggle because yeah, when you're right at the beginning, it's a new, shiny, fun idea, and then you're excited to get to the end, but slogging through that middle can be some effort for sure. I have a question. I found for myself that my writing process and everything kind of changes with every book I write. I also found the second book to be harder to write than the first. Do you find it similar for you, where the book you're working on now, like maybe Noble was a little easier to write and this one is a little harder, or are you finding it easier because you've done it once before?
Yeah, I do think the book that I'm writing now is called Master Misfortune, and I do think I am finding it harder to write just because I've gotten older. I think that I'm more like intentional about my word choices, and
Mhm.
when I was writing Noble, there were some days where I was writing an entire chapter in a day, and then I'd look at it in later drafts and then improve on it. Whereas at that moment, I was completely fine with it.
Right.
But now it's like I'll write like 2 or 3 paragraphs and then instantly start changing things.
Mhm.
So yeah, I think I've become not more critical of my work, but more open to changing things straight away.
Right.
So I
Right.
do I think yeah, it has become harder in that aspect.
Mhm.
Yeah, our skill level has advanced, but then again,
Yeah.
so has our taste. So we're trying to chase the
Also Master Misfortune is a lot longer than I mean not a lot longer. Noble Betrayed's a lot longer than Master Misfortune. So Master Misfortune's a lot smaller, so the words are more likely to like specific words are more likely to stick in a reader's head. So
Mhm.
I need to be
right.
more intentional with specific word choices.
Right. Yeah. Do you have writing advice that you have heard that you like or would recommend to another author?
Hmm. I guess I'm not sure there's like a specific quote about it, but I would like very much stress the importance of proofreading, because even if you think that you've just written the next Bible, there is still probably a plot hole somewhere. And if you put faith in your work without actually going back over it and making sure that it is as good as you believe that it is,
Right.
then you're just setting yourself up for potential failure.
Mhm. I have absolutely seen this firsthand,
Mm.
where another author and I were like, "Oh, let's read each other's works," and he gave it to me, and I'm like, "This is not edited." Did,
Right.
like, did you? Like, but yeah, that was a little awkward. But yes, absolutely, proofread, get an editor. You know, if
Mhm.
you can't afford an editor, like swap with other people to get it read by
Mhm.
other. Yeah, that is excellent advice.
Right. It's always helpful to get a second pair of eyes on anything.
You mentioned Lord of the Rings and The Witcher. Do you have any other influences on your writing?
All sorts of things. So I mean, even things like I read in school, like Macbeth, like Shakespeare plays, those
Mm.
had some impact. Especially with Macbeth, because it's a tragedy and focuses on the downfall of man. That is a topic that I do talk about a lot in my writing.
Yeah.
Mhm,
Um, Even things like an Inspector Calls, which is it's a play that was made in 1945. That's another one that we did in school, and it's a murder mystery type thing, and that influences a segment that I've been writing for the next novel book.
mhm.
So yeah, my influences come from more or less everywhere. There isn't really one specific area. Um, yeah, it's a bit of everything.
Yes.
Right.
Because novel is just a giant fantasy passion project, and each
Right.
character is revolving around a different topic. The influences go to a bit of everything.
Mhm.
Oh, yeah, that is interesting. To have such a large cast of main characters, you have to tell all their stories. So I anticipate it's going to be a pretty big series for you.
Yeah.
I'm
I'm
super excited.
thinking of I'm thinking of a trilogy, but because the books are so big, I might end up doing four.
Mhm.
Right.
So
There's a
it'll
lot
be either
going
three
on.
or four.
Oh, nice. That's exciting. Do you like writing series as opposed to standalones then? Because you can kind of spend more time in the world.
Yeah, it gives me more time to flesh things out without needing to find a cutoff point, I guess. I just need to find a
Right.
good cutoff point for the current book. I don't need to cut everything off.
Mhm.
Right. That is nice. I know a lot of people when they're editing are just like, get the words, like cutting words and cutting words. But it's nice.
I was originally planning on Noble Betrayed just being one book, but then I got about
Mm.
300 pages in and I was like, okay, there's no way that I can make this one book without it being about 1,500 pages long.
The
Right. And at some point, the printers cut you off and say, "We
Yeah, exactly.
the exact
too
same
heavy
thing
for one
happened to
book."
me. I set out to write one book, and it's become a trilogy because I just had way too much plot to fit in just one
Right.
Yeah.
book.
Right.
That's exciting.
That's nice for your readers though too, because like when you fall in love with a world and characters, you like to be able to spend some time with them in a
Yeah.
series. What I know we spoke a little bit about your ideas just kind of organically pop out, but what do you do when you're in search of inspiration?
So I read the news. A lot of my like poems that I've written are based on news stories.
Oh,
Uh, I've based characters on like family, friends, teachers, things like that. Um, yeah, in my inspiration comes from pretty much everywhere. Though it's like you have like random eureka moments, I guess, where
Mhm.
something
mhm.
has happened and you're just like a light bulb has gone off.
Right, right.
Yeah.
Those epiphany moments that you
Yeah,
have as a writer where you're like, oh, that's what I needed for my story.
It can be at the most random moment. Someone's saying something, and you're like, "That's it. That's it. I needed that."
Right,
And it has nothing to do with what they were talking about, but somehow it helped.
right.
yeah,
And then you have
exactly.
to
Yeah,
quickly end the conversation and run away to go to your notes.
Do you ever come up against writer's block as being a problem for you? And how do you
Oh
overcome
yeah,
it if it does?
yeah, absolutely. But I think the best thing to do with writer's block is to just take a break because there's no point in forcing yourself to write when you're not in the right mindset for it. So yeah, I would say just go do something else, and eventually the inspiration will hit, and your writer's block will be cured.
Right. Simple answer. I find that writer's block happens a lot when you are trying to force it in a direction maybe the story isn't supposed to go. So that's good advice.
Yeah, while you're
Um,
doing other things, it will like the plot that you're trying to work out will keep popping back into your mind at random points, and eventually you
right.
will end up solving it while you're doing that other thing.
Mm-hmm.
Absolutely. Yeah.
That's what I find.
The back of your mind just kind of keeps working on it while you're
Yeah.
doing other stuff. Yeah. What has been your most significant writing victory so far?
Well, I haven't had that many writing victories yet, so it is probably just the publication of Noble Betrayed, which was in October.
Yes, yes, it's so exciting. Congratulations on that again. Um, did you find the process of getting Noble Betrayed published, did you find that like daunting or particularly hard to do, or was that just something that you kind of were having fun learning to do along the way?
It wasn't excessively daunting. I didn't know that much about the process beforehand, so it was a learning process. But I self-published on Amazon, and I found it really accessible.
Sure.
So yeah, it wasn't that bad. Uh, I remember I was on holiday in Spain when I began the process, so it probably took about 2 or 3 months as soon as the draft was completed.
Yes, I was hoping to ask a little bit more. You said you've been going to like writing conventions, and then your mom posted a very interesting photo of you meeting Sir Ian McClellan, which had me very excited. I would love to hear more about that experience and meeting other authors.
Yeah, so with the convention that I went to, it was the AIM Literary Festival, and the AIM part stands for Author in Me. And they gave me a slot to speak about Noble Betrayed. I gave a speech which was probably about 5 minutes long. It was a mix of promoting my book and then also expressing the voice of young authors all around the globe. I was a lot older than the other young authors that they were promoting there, so I was meant to be acting as a sort of inspirational figure. And yeah, it went really well. A lot of people said that I spoke very well.
Were you very nervous at all?
Yeah, obviously, but there was like applause and things like that in the middle of the speech, so that eased my anxiety as I was speaking.
Oh, good. Yeah. Yeah, I've done a couple library talks and stuff like that, and it can be very daunting to be on stage. But I don't know. I always kind of employ this like author persona of it's not me that they're talking to, it's an author that they're talking to, so I can kind of put on this persona and feel like, oh, my foibles aren't there, as much because I kind of put on a public face. So
yeah, I find that public speaking goes in more or less the same way as private conversations, and that the beginning is the worst part, and then after that it just starts to get better and better as you carry on with the conversation.
Yeah, and you can always just apologize for being nervous to begin with,
Yeah,
and people are very forgiving. Yeah. That's always nice. Do you have a favorite book or author, and why is that your favorite?
I would say that my favorite book is still probably George R. R. Martin's. I will say A Storm of Swords, which is the third one in the series. I think that one's my favorite because it has, in my opinion, the most interesting points of view that get introduced. Like that's the book where Jaime Lannister becomes a point of view, and I really like his story in that book. But I just think that it's probably the best written one, and I think it's the one that has the least time spent dragging on, because he can be very he can be very verbose with his descriptions, and I think it's the least verbose.
Right. Yeah, there's a lot to love about the fantasy genre, but sometimes they get into descriptions of trees and things like that where you're just like, okay, we get it. We love nature.
Every time he explains their character is entering the scene, he always describes what they wear every single time.
Right,
And it
right.
gets to a point where it's just excessive.
Yeah,
Mhm.
yeah. Oh, yeah. I feel like all authors kind of have these like little quirks about them.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's definitely one of his quirks, I'm sure.
Well, as a fantasy writer, it's a really difficult balance to strike between making sure that your reader understands the environment, understands what people are looking at. So, like, you want to include a lot of description for them, but if you include too much, it becomes bogged down. But if you include too little, then they are speaking into a void and you don't know what's
Right.
going on, and it comes off as unbelievable or flimsy. So it's so hard to find that perfect middle ground between too dense and too light, for sure.
Right, right. Pacing is really important for all stories, but in fantasy, pacing can be really important because, like like Kirsha was saying, you don't want to
Mhm.
overly describe stuff and bore the reader, but you also don't want characters just floating in space.
High fantasy in particular, because you're creating a whole new world that we don't come with the information for. Or for an urban
Right.
fantasy or contemporary fantasy even, you don't have to explain what a car is,
Mm-hmm.
but in or even what the different animals are, you know what an elephant is. You don't, I mean,
Right.
it would be so funny to describe an elephant in a fantastical setting. They'd be like, that doesn't make sense, right? What kind of animal
I
would be
think,
happy?
yeah, I think in
Yeah.
Game of Thrones, the Lannisters actually have lions, but they're never actually
Oh,
described. They just mention
right.
that they have
Yeah.
lions. I would have liked to have seen that.
Right, right.
Yes.
It's like the thing that the author chose to describe is
Yeah,
not what you wanted to hear.
yeah.
So
Yeah.
yeah, it's
Oh, that's
tricky to
really
seed
true.
all of that information organically and keep the flow flowing.
Hmm.
But yeah,
Yeah.
that would be interesting if their version of a lion was not what we would consider to be a lion at all.
Yeah, it could be completely different. We don't know.
Mhm.
Right, right. Do you have writing advice? I know you said you didn't really have particular advice that you love. Do you have writing advice that you hate?
Yeah, the writing advice that I hate is it's one that a lot of people love, so it might be a bit of a shock, but I hate show don't tell.
Oh, okay.
Because there are some things that you should absolutely just tell, and
Absolutely.
by encouraging to this happens a lot at schools where they say show don't tell. By
Right.
encouraging people to always be showing, you're leading them into doing a lot of excessive description that is really not needed. Like if you want to say a character's age, just say their age. Don't make it excessive. I mean, maybe you could like describe the fact that they're young or something instead of
Mm-hmm.
just outright saying their age. But sometimes, if it's needed to have a specific age in the story, just say their age.
Mhm,
Right.
mhm.
Yeah, there's definitely some details that can be like glossed over or more to the point. Whereas, yeah, I know people tout show don't tell because as an editor, I've read some stories where I'm like, okay, and then they say the epic battle took place, but they only say the epic battle took place and then they move on, and I'm like, but wait, like
Mhm,
I want to experience the epic battle, but then there's definitely other times where it's like, okay, yeah, we don't need to describe how they got there, just get them there.
mhm.
So
It's
yeah.
important to know, again, for flow, when to sort of
Mhm.
gloss over something, when to just give it to the reader and not make them guess, not make them
Right.
extrapolate the data. Um, I've absolutely experienced exactly what you're talking about, where a character, I'm like, how old is this person? Based off their behavior, their description, off of everything, I
Right.
don't actually know how old this person is. Like, can can someone
Yeah,
say it?
could we just have that fact?
Mhm,
It
And
works. It works in schools because in schools they want to look at the quality of your description rather than the
mhm,
actual like
mhm,
your actual quality at telling a narrative. But then when it
right.
comes to actual like writing, you don't want to be showing everything.
mhm, mhm,
Absolutely. And there's also the sense that you learn a rule so you can break it
Yeah.
effectively, right? So the basic of the rule is show, don't tell, but there's always exceptions that we learn
Yeah.
as we
The
become a
best achievements that humans have made are the ones where they broke the rules.
absolutely, absolutely. And I love that you're trying to be so innovative. What are some other ways? So, you talk about, playing with genre a little bit, having a little murder mystery in or mystery in with the fantasy genre. But what are some other ways you're trying to be innovative in writing?
So my writing style. So with Noble Betrayed, it's something that I think it's not completely different in literature, but it's something that I don't remember ever reading in fantasy, wherein it's all the chapters are in first person. Generally, they're in third person,
Yeah.
and they're not written to be seen as entirely reliable. You're meant to be able to read the chapter, decide whether or not you believe this character's account of what's just happened. And there are definitely pieces of dialogue which seem slightly out of place with what you already know about the characters. And it's about deciding whether or not you trust everything that they're telling you, because it may just be that they want to write down something that's different than the reality.
Right. There's a lot of, I'm sure, court intrigue and politics at play and all of that stuff that would make people not necessarily trustworthy. That in a lot of ways that reminds me of like Shakespearean plays where we have the asides to the audience, and kind of the audience knows more about what's going on than the other characters, which can create a very interesting dynamic and tension to the story. So
I love a little bit of misinformation seeded here and there, just to throw the reader off a little bit.
Noble Betrayed is full of misinformation. The reality is like the reality and what you actually understand of this one like set of plots that goes on within the story. It's like you think that one person is getting betrayed, and then you realize that that person is being the person that is doing the betrayal is also being betrayed by someone else. And it's just like a giant chain of betrayals, which is why it's called Noble Betrayed.
Right. Apt title. I love that. Now you got to meet Sir Ian McCullen. Is there any other author or some authors that you look up to that you would love to meet?
Yeah, so firstly, a lot more on Ian McKellen. So he was going into his to get ready in costume because he's doing a pantomime called Mother Goose right now.
Oh, nice.
And so I met him while he was on his way in there. Gave him a copy of Noble Betrayed. He asked me to sign it, so that was fun.
Oh yeah.
And I was given a pen, so I wrote my name in it, and there's a video of that on TikTok, which has probably around 97,000 views now.
Oh, nice.
Yeah. And then in terms of other authors I'd like to meet, George R. R. Martin, obviously. But Stephen King, I guess, is another one because he's been so influential to writing in general. Yeah.
Oh, such a prolific author.
Yeah. But more or less any author that has done something that has ended up changing our attitudes towards literature, I guess.
Right. Yeah, and that's
even some of the ones that are dead now, if they could be resurrected just so I could talk to them for 10 minutes, that would be fun.
Yeah, I think absolutely. Yeah. Stephen King's one of my sister's favorite authors. So, but yeah, he's done a lot to, just give genre fiction a spotlight in the public eye. And I could never write every day like he does, but I really respect the sheer amount of writing that he does.
He writes 6. I think he said that he aims to write about 6 pages a day. I don't know how he does it.
I've heard that as well.
Yeah. It's just, great creativity and imagination. I aspire. Where can we find you online, and where can we find more details about your book?
Okay, so in terms of social media, I'm present on Instagram, Twitter, and TikTok. And with all of them, look up L Brennan 51. So L is as in the Spanish article. So it's EL Brennan 51.
Wonderful.
If you search that on any of those 3, it'll come up with me.
Okay.
And Noble Betrayed is exclusively available on Amazon. So yeah, just go on your local version of Amazon and search Noble Betrayed, and it will come up.
Wonderful. Yes, it was so fabulous to have you on. Thank you so much for joining us. And
thank you for having me.
Yeah. For our listeners at home, thanks for joining us as well. And remember, there's more than one way up a mountain. If you're interested in being a guest on the Tell Not Show, you can find us on social media at the Tell Not Show, or you can email us at thetellnotshow@gmail.com. So
Yes.
thank you so much again.
Thank
It
you
was
so
so
much, Dylan.
fabulous having
Thank
you,
you.
Dylan.
Thanks again for listening. If you enjoyed the show, consider subscribing and liking. We appreciate all the support. Julia J.K. Allen is an author, editor, and coach and can be found at hijingsrudder.com.
Kirsha Fox is an author, avid reader, gamer, and mother to four, and you can find her at kirshafox.com. Thanks and see you next time.